Hello and welcome. You all can sit wherever you'd like. On behalf of Indivisible Charlottesville, I want to thank you all for coming out this afternoon. My name is Caroline Melton, and I am on the steering committee for Indivisible Charlottesville. For anyone who may not be familiar with our organization, our mission is to empower citizens to oppose the Trump agenda and defend democracy by holding our elected officials accountable. This year, one of our main goals is to unseat 5th District Congressman Tom Garrett. Pennsylvania did this past week, flipping a district that Trump won by 20 points. We are more confident than ever that a huge wave is coming. We know that we can flip Virginia's 5th district, and that starts by selecting the Democratic candidate. Fortunately, we have 4 great candidates joining us today. And this afternoon, we hope that you'll be able to learn more about their positions so that you can participate in the process of nominating a candidate. As you may be aware, there is no primary election in our district this year. The Democratic candidate will be nominated at a convention on May 5th. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that you can't make your voice heard. Before the convention, each locality in the district will first hold a caucus. Anyone can attend their local caucus in support of their favorite candidate and help determine how many delegates that candidate sends to the convention. For your reference, the date of the Charlottesville caucus is April 21st, and the Albemarle County caucus is April 16th. If you'd like to learn more about how you can participate in this process, we've got all the information along with some very helpful visual aids on our website at indivisiblecharlottesville.org, and you can look for the big button on our homepage that says One Term Tom. Before we get started, I'd like to explain about the raffle tickets that you may have received as you came in. Tonight at 6 p.m., there is a chance to meet the 4 candidates one-on-one at the Charlottesville Democrats annual pasta supper at the Fry Spring Beach Club. The candidates will be competing for the Golden Chef Trophy for Best Pasta Sauce, so it should be a fun evening. We'll announce 2 winners at the end of the debate, but you can also purchase tickets online by visiting SeavilleDems.org. This is a major fundraiser for the local party, and it helps them run important events like the caucuses and get out the vote drives. So even if you aren't one of the lucky winners today, please consider attending. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's debate. Nicole Hemmer is an assistant professor in presidential studies at UVA's Miller Center and is a columnist for Vox and Fairfax Media. She co-founded and edits Made by History, the history section of the Washington Post. She is also the author of Messengers of the Right, Conservative Media and the Transformation of American Politics, and the host of the weekly podcast, Past Present. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Hemmer.
Everyone. I'd like to thank Indivisible for organizing today's candidate forum, and a special thanks to all of you for joining us on this lovely Saturday afternoon. Today's debate is going to run for about an hour and a half. We'll start with opening statements from the candidates and then move to a series of policy discussions. And at the end, the candidates will have a final 90 seconds to make their closing statements, and then we will wrap things up. The goal today is to spark a discussion, one that allows us to see what each candidate's priorities are and what their differences are, so that the citizens of the 5th District can make the best choice to represent them in the general election later this year. So to kick things off, let's turn it over to the candidates. If each of you could take 90 seconds to introduce yourselves and your campaigns to the audience. And we'll start right here.
Hi guys, thank you all for being here. I'm Andrew Sneathern. I live here with my wife Larissa in Fry Springs. We've got two little boys, Jackson and Dylan, who we're raising here. And I'm an attorney by training. I've been a prosecutor. I've been an elected prosecutor, and I've been a special prosecutor of domestic violence and sexual assault. I have also worked in the Office of the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. And I am a farm kid. I grew up on a farm that's been in my family for 5 generations. My mother still farms that ground and owns that farm to this day. And I grew up in a town and a place that is very, very much like the substantial portion, physical portion of the 5th District. And I'm excited about the chance of going and talking about our progressive values every single place in the 5th District. That's what drives me every day. As a Democrat, I believe that every single one of us has value, and that when any one of us is not living up to our value or is hurting, that we're all diminished by that. And I believe that we're being taught a selfish ideology by the right, one born of weakness and political motives rather than what's best for our community. And so that's the progressive values that I would like to go and talk about in every part of the 5th. Thank you all so much.
Hey everybody, how does it feel to be a Democrat in the greatest state of the union, to be a Democrat, huh? Sent a great governor to Richmond, great lieutenant governor, to get that attorney general back, and how about that Connor Lamb election, huh? If you don't know what to do, send in the Marine, okay? Now, my name is Roger Dean Huffstetler. Most people call me RD. My grandmother calls me Roger Dean, so, that's fine too. But I live here in Charlottesville with my wife, Emily. She's an OBGYN at the Martha Jefferson Hospital. I was born in North Carolina, and I grew up in Georgia. Through the Marine Corps and working in technology, I lived all over the country and got an all-expenses-paid trip to Iraq and Afghanistan to boot. And really happy to be raising my family here. My wife, Emily, doesn't get to come very often, but she is here today with Alice Sue, so I'm really happy she's here with me today. Listen, I'm running for Congress because D.C. is broken, and Tom Garrett is the poster child for that dysfunction. The House Freedom Caucus is a cancer on our country, and with your help, we're going to make sure this is the last election shot cycle that they cripple our country. Tom Garrett and those folks continue to put ideology in front of ideas how to make the country better. They put the House Freedom Caucus in front of the country, and they continue to put the special interests in front of us. And what I'm asking is to be your nominee so I can go forward and we can hold Tom Garrett accountable for his terrible judgments as our so-called congressman. He has said openly that he doesn't even want to represent everyone here in the 5th District. Now, one of the jokes I often make in the campaign is, the most conservative person in America and the most liberal person in America live in the 5th District of Virginia. It was not exactly drawn for a Democrat. But we're going to go forward and we're going to do everything we can to make sure he gets out of politics because he's not doing a good job. And we can hold him accountable. And with the energy we're seeing in these special elections, when we send candidates out who have a background, who can win those districts, we're going to change our country and we're going to get everything back on track. So thank you for being here today.
This is a special treat. We don't usually all have our own microphones, so thank you to Indivisible. Usually you're sharing. I'm Ben Cullop, and I was born in the 5th District of Virginia. I was born at Martha Jefferson Hospital. I was raised in Virginia. Now I'm raising my family here. I live in Earlysville with my wife, Ashley, and we have 2 young children. We have a little daughter, Elizabeth, who's almost 4 years old, and we have a son we just adopted from Fort Worth, Texas last summer, named Thomas, who is almost 8 months old. I'm running for Congress because this is my home. The people that we see as we travel around this district, they're my friends, they're my relatives, they're my neighbors, they're the people that I've grown up with. And so when I see someone struggling to get a good job or find a good education for their kids or access to affordable, high-quality health care, That's personal for me. And frankly, I know that we can do a lot better. We can do better than Tom Garrett, we can do better than Donald Trump, and we can certainly do better than the failed policies and rhetoric coming out of Washington. The third reason I'm running for Congress, to be honest with you, is corporate money in politics. Our democracy has been bought and paid for by big corporations who have put Congress people in their pockets. You want to know why we can't solve the issues like gun control or the fact that our prescription drug prices are so high? It's because those industries and their corporate PACs have put the congressmen and women in Washington into their pockets. So I pledged at the beginning of this campaign not to take a dime from corporate PACs, and that's a pledge that I'll hold during this campaign as well as during my time in the House of Representatives. Lastly, I'm really proud that we're engaging a new generation of folks in the political process. As we travel around, we're going to high schools, we're going to colleges, we're talking to people who have not previously been involved in politics. In 2017, half of the people that donated to my campaign were first-time federal donors, never been involved and never given to a federal race before. These aren't Republicans that we're convincing to be Democrats. These are people who are not in the political system, and we've brought them in and we've energized them. And that is one of the things I'm most proud of so far in this campaign. So looking forward to this over the course of the afternoon. Thanks for having me.
I'm Leslie Cockburn. I'm the one candidate up here that no corporation would ever give money to. I was an investigative journalist for 35 years, so I have a long record of speaking truth to power, and that sometimes involves going up against people like Goldman Sachs or General Motors, they're not inclined to give money to former 60 Minutes producers, I'll tell you. I live in Rappahannock County with my husband. We've been there for 19 years. Rappahannock is a spectacularly beautiful, very rural county. We have no stoplight. We're down the road from Washington. It's to my house, it's an hour and 15 minutes from Washington. So my husband and I, our whole family, moved out from Washington. I have 3 grown children. I have one's an attorney, one's an actress, and one's a writer, and they're all Democrats. And I have 4 gorgeous grandchildren. The reason why I'm running, it's very unusual for someone with my background covering the world. I covered 6 wars. I covered 3 wars in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I was in Somalia, Colombia, Cambodia, Haiti, Central America, etc. People like me normally don't go into politics because we've been so exposed to the follies of Capitol Hill. We've seen up close. I mean, my job was to hold people accountable. Most Congress people don't necessarily measure up as you would like them to. But with Donald Trump coming into office, everything really changed for me. After I was really offended by him as a woman. I was offended by that tape. We all remember the tape. And I, as a former journalist, it's very offensive, too, to see him really go after the Fourth Estate, which he's done relentlessly, and calling us and my former colleagues the enemies of the people of the United States. We need a Fourth Estate. Everyone in this room knows that, or we have no democracy. And the other thing is that I was able to see, because of my experience in my work, I was able to see how he could quickly dismantle everything I care about in Washington, and he really hasn't disappointed me. He's done it. And I'm so proud to be running against him and against our mini Trump, who is Tom Garrett. Tom Garrett is exactly like Trump. In fact, I hear rumors that he's even perhaps trying to get a job in the White House. Maybe he feels that he's going to lose. We hope so. I know that the Republicans feel they're going to lose the House, and we really feel that we're going to lose the House. I mean, that we're going to win the House in this blue wave, and it's a very exciting time. So thank you for having me.
All right. Well, our our first topic this afternoon is on a subject that has been at the forefront of most Americans' minds in the last month: gun violence. You each have said that you grew up with guns and hunting in some form or another, that you understand and appreciate the role of guns in American society, and that you support common sense gun reform. But the problem with common sense gun reform is that it can mean just about anything. So we wanted to dig a little deeper to see if we can get into some specifics. First of all, I believe each of you has said that you support a federal ban on assault weapons. Is that right? Does anyone not support a federal ban on assault weapons? Okay, then let's get more into the specifics. RD, you have said that a ban on the purchase of assault weapons will not consist of any mandatory buyback of firearms that have already been legally purchased. But some people would argue that that's a real problem, given that there are between 8.5 and 15 million assault rifles already in circulation in America. After the Port Arthur mass shooting in Australia in 1996, Australia not only instituted gun bans, but it included a mandatory buyback, and they haven't had a single mass shooting ever since. So my question to you is, does a federal assault ban actually achieve anything if it doesn't include a mandatory buyback?
You know, I wanted to think about this issue very carefully, and what I did was, my dad passed away 17 years ago, but he was an NRA member. And what I wanted to do as I thought through this process was write him a letter. And I spoke to my Uncle Bill, who carried an assault weapon in Vietnam and got a Purple Heart, and he's a big Trump supporter. And I said, well, Uncle Bill, what do you think we should do about this? And he said, we should ban these weapons of war. And then I asked my cousin, who teaches high school down in North Carolina, a similar question. He said, it won't solve the problem fully, but we should ban these weapons. And so my opinion was really formulated from people in my life who I grew up with, who I knew shoot shotguns for hunting and et cetera, and had guns in their life the whole time. And the answer is yes, it will do something. And we know this from the data. From 1994 to 2004, the assault weapons ban was in place, and we know that materially impacted the number of mass casualty events in our country. And we had no buyback at that time either. So it will do something, and it is important that I have a whole slew of gun violence reduction policies on my website as well, Nicole. And we need to make sure we repeal the Dickey Amendment. The Dickey Amendment prevents the federal government from studying the root cause of gun violence. Jay Dickey was a Republican from Arkansas who wrote the amendment, and before he died, he said we should repeal it. So it's common sense. Let's get rid of that thing. The second thing we got to do is have comprehensive, exhaustive background checks so terrorists, domestic abusers, and criminals cannot be getting weapons when they don't need them. The third thing that I call for on the website is a gun violence restraining order. What I like about this is it's a bottom-up approach. A woman or a man in their home who feels unsafe because there's a firearm there can petition a judge in their community to have the firearm taken out for a period of time, and they can continue to present evidence to show that they're not safe. This is a hard issue for the 5th District of Virginia. There's a lot of what people call Jacksonians in our district, people to whom having a gun is a big part of their identity. And we got to send someone forward who can talk about this issue in a way that is materially going to be helpful to the country, but also get something done. I was at Parris Island where they train Marines for 70 training days. You hold an M16 in your hand until the 42nd day before you squeeze around to that rifle. And we cannot allow someone to purchase that weapon off the internet and massacre our fellow civilians. Thank you.
Andrew, I want to ask you about the other side of this. Like the other candidates, you support a ban on AR-15s. There is a real fear among many Americans that the government is coming for our guns. And this is something that we saw after Barack Obama was elected, when there was a spike in gun sales because that concern or that fear was being fed by Fox News, by Republicans, by the NRA, and others. So how do you reassure Americans who are concerned that first there will be a ban on assault weapons, but maybe that's just the entering wedge of coming for our guns?
That's actually a really great question. Let me start by saying I believe I'm probably the NRA's worst nightmare. I am a lifelong gun owner who would be absolutely disappointed if I don't get an F rating from the NRA. I think they don't represent gun owners at all. They represent only the manufacturing companies, and they do it to many of our children's lives' detriment. And so I start from that position. And I agree that there is a certain percentage of people who, like Trump said, he could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone, and he wouldn't lose those voters. And I think there's a certain percentage of voters who they're a single-issue voter and they believe what you say. And I doubt very seriously that I'm going to modify that position on them. But I think that the vast, vast, vast majority of gun owners are like I am, that they look at this as something that we can reasonably change, and we can do things to make our children and all of our lives safer. I'll give you an example. I think it's important to send somebody to Washington, not just who understands this issue, but can talk with some specificity. When I was a kid, the earliest memories I have of my dad, and some of the best, are him carrying me into a duck blind when I was a little kid through the swamp, because I wasn't tall enough to walk in the water. And he would carry me on his shoulders, and I would carry with me the gun that he was going to shoot, which was a Browning semi-automatic weapon, which means every time you pull the trigger, it fires. And we have accepted in hunting for generations that you could only have 3 rounds when you hunted for ducks or geese or anything like that. Why in the world wouldn't we accept a limitation on the amount of rounds intended only for the purpose of killing people? It makes no sense at all. It makes no sense at all. We should absolutely ban large capacity magazines, and we should talk to people where they are. And someone like me who understands that can do that. And that's what I think would be a great thing for us to send to Washington. Someone who can speak where people are. So thank you.
Leslie.
Well, I too grew up hunting, but I must say my parents didn't allow me into the duck blind at that early age. I had to wait. I got my first hunting license when I was a teenager. My mother was an excellent shot. It wasn't just my father. So the emphasis in my household was gun safety. And that was good. We learned how to not shoot other people hunting with us, but shoot the birds instead. But as an adult, having been in so many war zones, having seen so many conventional weapons, almost every conventional weapon that there is, I have seen fired somewhere either above me or to the side of me. And I do know that we don't want that to happen here. And I was very alarmed seeing those weapons coming into Charlottesville on August 12th. This is not what we want. I've seen 2 cities destroyed by firearms. One was Mogadishu, and the other was Kabul, with some rockets thrown in as well, and a few 1,000-pound bombs. I think that, first of all, I support the assault weapons ban that is right now on the table in the House of Representatives. It's a new bill. It's a lot like the one from 1994. I would sign my name to that immediately. And no, it doesn't mention buyback, as the Australians did so successfully, though we could have a voluntary buyback plan. I think that, California has just enacted this. So as of the beginning of this year, you cannot buy an assault weapon or a bump stock or large capacity magazines in California. So that should definitely be done on a federal level. I also think that part of this issue that's very important is, aside from the gun show loopholes and all that, which is always discussed, but that it's also a women's issue, because if you got rid of people buying guns who were guilty of domestic violence, either misdemeanor or felony, you would get rid of 50% of these mass murders. This is, every town has done the work on this. So I would really tighten up that. And I would, meanwhile, what is Tom Garrett doing? He's saying that we should be able to Virginians should be able to bring assault weapons to the Capitol, to Washington. Why? To protect themselves in the Capitol. He has said that people should be able to have concealed carry, bring weapons to other states. Well, some states have very strict gun laws, and other states have no laws at all for concealed carry. You can conceal carry in West Virginia without a permit. And in Virginia, you can get a permit very easily. So, and not only can you take those weapons to another state, but you can bring them into a school zone. I think this is wrong. So there are many, many things that we have to address going to Capitol Hill, and we can make a difference. And I'm going to march.
This is a place where, one of the nice things about running in a Democratic primary or caucus is that we tend to agree with each other on a lot of stuff. We're all for banning assault weapons, we're for limiting magazine sizes, and we're for ensuring that domestic abusers don't have access to firearms. But one of the places my head goes to on this is where Washington is absolutely broken. Just absolutely broken. After every mass shooting, tribalism sets in and both sides retreat to their corners. You can tell how politicians are going to respond to a mass shooting by the letter that's after their name. It's just pure tribalism. Look at Parkland, right? Right after Parkland in Florida, CNN hosted a town hall, and it was for these students who've been so aggrieved and threatened to question their elected leaders. Right? This is exactly, in my mind, what democracy looks like. These students are standing up to the people that they voted for. What did CNN do afterwards? It was who's up, who's down, who won the debate, who lost the debate. It is absolutely, this issue is everything that's wrong with Washington. My father-in-law, who is a wonderful man, he has this saying that many of you have heard before, which is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We're doing that right now with Washington on the issue of gun control. And I believe that we're not going to solve this issue until we throw the bums out and elect a wholesale new generation of leaders who think about this issue differently and will approach it with our community's safety in mind before anything else.
So then let me just follow up with you quickly on that. It sounds great, throw the bums out.
Yep.
What does it actually look like for it to function differently? Like, will we not just put new bums in, or what will actually change?
I guess that's up for debate. I think one of the things that Washington has lost is its ability to work. And I think when we hear the idea of working together, Democrats and Republicans retreat to their corners because they think that their values are going to be compromised, right? Hardcore Democrats don't want to see a Democrat working with a Republican because they feel like they're going to compromise and give away the farm. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about electing a group of people who are results oriented. I'm not interested in going to Washington to get reelected. I'm not interested in going to Washington to be on TV. I'm interested in going to Washington to get stuff done. And if that means working with Democrats, independents, Republicans, that's what I'm there to do.
Nicole, could I say something about that?
Please.
So, I have this idea that potentially this wave election will bring 40 new Democrats to Congress who are also veterans across the country. And perhaps we can find 40 Republican veterans as well. And we can form the anti-House Freedom Caucus. And what we're focused on is getting results for the American people. There's a Republican Congressman, Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's a fellow Marine as well, and he's taken some steps to speak out against President Trump. And Congressman Robert Mass, Republican from Florida, actually wrote an op-ed coming out for an assault weapons ban. So there is this idea in the country that people are interested in working together and putting the country first. And in my head, I think, well, okay, if we can get this done, if we could just get to D.C., if we could just get the folks up there who are going to continue to work work together in a bipartisan fashion to work on things that 80% of Americans agree with. 80% of Americans want comprehensive background checks. 80% of Americans want quality affordable health care in every zip code. 80% of Americans want a tax system that works for small business owners and helps with new business formation. And I think Ben is right. There's an influence from outside forces and special interests, but I think it just comes down to, do we have the will to put the country in front of everything else and get things done for the American people?
I would like to address the same issue on throwing the bums out. First of all, I don't think it should be just veterans, because Tom Garrett is a veteran, and I think we want him out. So I don't think that should be the criterion. I think my view is different. I think that we have some fantastic Democrats up there. A couple of weeks ago, I was with John Lewis in Washington and Steve Cohen from Memphis, and there are great women up there. There's Catherine Clark, there's Lois Frankel. We need to support the people who are there doing the work. We talk about Washington as a swamp. What it is, it's unbalanced on the Hill. It's exactly what the House of Delegates here used to look like, where you couldn't get anything done because it's all Republicans. It's a sea of red. Now, we're so close in the House of Delegates, and the whole complexion of the place has changed, as I think David Toscano's in the room, and he knows. But I think that we can do the same thing on Capitol Hill. It's simply there need to be more Democrats up there who can work together. Practically every piece of good legislation is there waiting to sign.
You're looking at me like I should say something, Nicole. So I'm sitting here thinking about, I'd love to throw the bums out. But one of the issues that's dearest to my heart is ending political gerrymandering. And the reality is, let's talk about the reality. Tom Garrett should be Exhibit A in the anti-gerrymandering law case, right? Trial. Because he thinks he cannot lose. Now I look around this room and I see and I realize that this is not his seat, this is your all's seat. But the truth is, he doesn't come to Charlottesville and talk to you. He does not come and talk to anyone face to face because he doesn't think he can lose. This place, Linda Perriello has endorsed me. She did so, I think, largely because she told me to get involved and learn about this issue and asked me to be on One Virginia 2021. And when Linda tells you to do something, you do it. And so I learned about this issue. And when you have a district that is drawn specifically to make sure that a Republican gets elected, or in other states, a Democrat gets elected, we have to be honest with ourselves about just kicking someone out this time is not going to be sufficient. We have to work to change that so that everyone's vote counts. And we have to work together to make sure that our progressive values reach every single part of this extremely gerrymandered district. So, thank you.
All right, we are going to move on to our next topic, which is another biggie, which is healthcare. The United States has the highest expenditures on healthcare in the developed world, and we still don't cover everyone. All of you have said you support one of two different plans to address this, either Medicare for All, which is Bernie Sanders' bill, or Medicare X, which is sponsored by Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. So I want to start off with you, Leslie. Leslie, you and Andrew support Senator Sanders' Medicare for All bill. This would provide truly universal health care, and it would end the worries about finding a network that includes your preferred providers. On the other hand, if there's anything that the 2010 battle over the ACA showed, it's that people really, really resist change. The ACA barely passed, and Medicare for All goes much, much further than the ACA. It would overturn the entire existing marketplace, likely resulting in the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs in the industry, and would do away with all existing plans other than Medicare. So a lot of political capital would have to be spent to make this a reality. What's the upside? What are the benefits of this plan that aren't offered by the Medicare X bill?
Me first?
Sure.
Okay. Actually, there are two bills. There's Bernie's bill in the Senate, and there's also a Medicare for All bill in the House, which Keith Ellison has just become the sponsor for that bill. It actually goes beyond Medicare. It covers vision, it covers dental, it covers hearing. The thing about these bills is, first of all, we're already paying $3.2 trillion a year for health care. It's important when people say, how are you going to pay for these things? We're already paying the cost. It is vastly more expensive to pay for people having preventative care in the emergency room. That is how you spend. Also, we have such incredible overhead. We would immediately drop about $500 billion in overhead by switching to Medicare for All. The Medicare for All switch is designed to be gradual. The Bernie bill, it's over 4 years. In those 4 years, there's a Medicare option that's on the ACA. So, and it would be desirable because overhead is so much cheaper for Medicare than it is for these insurance companies. It's 2% versus 18%. The cost over 10 years is going to be so much lower. I mean, we're now paying twice as much per American as is paid in Canada. And if you look at the plans in Canada, in Britain, in France, in Germany, they are really doing a lot better than we are. This is the only country where 700,000 people a year are going bankrupt from healthcare costs. The rest of the developed world, that number is 0. So it's time, and it's very different from 2010. A lot of presidential hopefuls are putting their name on that Bernie bill. People realize that our healthcare system is truly broken, and particularly in Charlottesville, where you have only Optima. And Optima is gouging everyone here. As I met with Sarah Stovall the other day, who's trying to take them on. And she spent time in Richmond, and she believes that there's a lack of interest in Richmond, and she would like to turn that around. So I put her in touch with Don Beyer, who said that he would help her with that. I think that, there's no question that we have to dramatically change where our medical system is now, and we have to hold Big Pharma's feet to the fire. I want to hold hearings with Big Pharma. I want to ask why it is that we don't negotiate drug prices. Why can we spend 1,000 times more for a drug than is spent in Canada? My husband has an eye problem. He has a tiny tube that he has to use and renew every 10 days. This thing costs $400 in the United States. It costs, far less, a tiny fraction in Canada. So this has to stop.
Ben, I'm going to go to you because UNRD supports Senator Kane's Medicare X bill. This is a more gradual, incrementalist plan that would leave the existing insurance company in place with all of its inefficiencies and high administrative overhead. Consumers would still have to worry about what networks their providers are in. I'm going to give you a chance to tell me why I'm wrong. And they still have to pay for premiums and deductibles, and it's not even clear that you would get universal coverage out of this. So why would you support Medicare X over Medicare for All?
This is when I get to
go for it.
So Tim Kaine's Medicare X proposal, I'll talk about it in just a second. But before I do that, I'll tell you my story on healthcare, because I want you guys to understand where I come from on this issue, and the fact that healthcare for me is much more personal than it is partisan. Our daughter Elizabeth, who I told you is almost 4, she was born severely premature. She was born 3 months early. Spent the first 2 months of her life in the neonatal intensive care unit at UVA. The night that she was born, the doctors told Ashley and I that they weren't sure that she was going to survive her first 72 hours of life. And thanks to the good doctors and amazing nurses who took care of her for those 2 months, she's now a healthy and happy 4-year-old little girl. Now, we got the statement of charges for her 2-month stay in the hospital. It was north of $500,000. Now, that is absolutely devastating for a family. Devastating. Now, we were fortunate because Ashley and I were both working and we had insurance. But it should not take good fortune to be healthy in America. It shouldn't. Now, Tim Kaine's program, Medicare X, puts Medicare as an option into the Affordable Care Act exchanges. So, if you live in a place where you don't have coverage or there's only one provider, like Albemarle or Fluvanna, you'd be able to buy into Medicare at its cost. And, what we have found when you survey people who are on Medicare, they're pretty happy with it. Now, why am I for this option versus a different option? And I think you have to go back to a fundamental American value. And Americans value choice. Americans value choice. Just look at how many boxes of cereal you have when you go into a grocery store, right? Look at how many cars there are. If you want to go buy a new car, look at how many options you have. And healthcare is not different than that for Americans, the way they perceive it. And we can sit here and say, well, what they should value is X, Y, and Z, but the reality is that Americans value choice. And I'm looking to give Americans more choice on this issue rather than less choice. And I think that's what the fundamental issue with Medicare X is, that it does. It gives people another option if they so choose it. But if you are buying your insurance through your employer or on the exchange and you're happy with it, you can continue to do so. That's why I settle on Medicare X as the right solution for the 5th District of Virginia.
So, Andrew, what would you say as somebody who supports Medicare for all? Does it offer less choice? And if so, why is that a good thing for medical care consumers?
Well, my position is to expand Medicare for all and to leave the ACA in place. And what I believe will happen is we will end up with single payer. I believe that will be the answer because I believe that's what other countries around the world have found. I'm pragmatic about it in this sense. I think by doing that, either the marketplace and ACA will get much, much better and much, much more efficient, or they won't and they'll go away. And either of those things would be good for the American public. And I want to say that from my heart, I'm ashamed that we have not resolved this issue in this country. I have a very dear friend who I spoke with on the phone yesterday who has had to battle 4 times cancer now. And she just had to cancel an oncology appointment because she no longer has health insurance. And if she's forced to buy it on the market, she simply can't do it. She simply cannot do it because she has pre-existing condition. No one would take her. And it is utterly unimaginable to me that in this country of such wealth that we treat our fellow citizens like this. This is not just a right that all of us should have. This is an obligation that each of us owe to one another, to our children, to our elderly. People shouldn't work their entire lives and get sick one time and find themselves bankrupt because of that. And the question of cost, I want to say what Leslie said, we are already paying for this. We are paying, it is projected by 2023 that the per capita cost for healthcare will be nearly $15,000. What could we be doing with that? And who is taking that money? It's insurance companies. It is insurance companies. And so they have proven themselves again and again. We can't be mad that corporations behave like corporations. What we have to do is change the policy. And what I want to say one final thing. Tom Garrett was one of the very last votes to try to do away with the ACA and pass the ACHA. And he said the reason he didn't vote earlier for it is because it didn't go far enough. That is the most hateful thing I can imagine, and I cannot wait to stand on the stage and go after him for that.
I just want to make one comment about choice. Right now, people don't have choice of their providers. If you have an HMO, you have no choice. Medicare for All gives you choice. You can go to any doctor you want. The other thing is you can choose to leave your workplace and find another one. Right now, people are afraid to leave their jobs because they have health care. I can't leave my job. With Medicare for All, you can leave your job because you will still be covered. This frees you. So you definitely have more choice with Medicare for All.
Right now in our country, your zip code determines your life expectancy. That's not exactly the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness we are promised in our founding documents. And I believe health care is a right. I will fight for it in every zip code to have quality, affordable health care. So I think the outcomes that folks want are very, very similar, if not identical. We just have a slightly different view on how to get there. You know, President Obama has said sometimes progress isn't always in the same in a line. You know, and what's happening right now is this administration is chipping away at ACA. So the honest answer is, no matter what you're for in the long term, the first thing we got to do is fix ACA. And here's what we got to do. Thank you. The Republicans have eliminated the individual mandate. Now, I often say when I'm with these folks, you know, nobody likes to be told what to do. I can understand that. But the individual mandate is important for the whole system to work. That's the only way to keep the premiums down, is everybody has to participate in the marketplace. So we got to get that back. And the second thing that this administration has done is gotten rid of cost-sharing agreements, which bring a lot of stability to our markets. We got to fight to put that back in place. Remember, Democrats like Tom Perriello and others took a very tough vote on health care to make sure that we have no pre-existing conditions, no gender rating in these bills, so women these plans, so women don't have to pay more than men, no lifetime caps. That's a lot of progress, but we got to fight to keep that in place so that people can still have health care in this country. Now, Medicare X, why is that the plan I favor? Well, first of all, it's fast. We can use the system that's in place to put this plan on the exchange. We could get a public option right here in Charlottesville, right here now tomorrow, as soon as we get that bill through the Congress. That's important. We have the highest premium increases in the country where we're sitting. So we've got to have relief fast on something that we can compromise to get to quickly. And this choice point is actually extremely important. People need to use choice to help keep the cost pressure down in the marketplace. That's not happening right now. So that's why I favor Medicare X. I think it's a very strong plan that will continue to expand coverage for folks. The last thing about healthcare that I just want you to think about as you're thinking about the answer to this question: coverage, access, and quality. Medicare only covers coverage in those three things. Just because you have health insurance does not mean you have a doctor next door that will take that plan. So we've got to work on the other two variables as well, which means we want everybody to have coverage, but we also want high quality, affordable health care for everybody in every zip code. Thank you.
Can I say one thing on that point? Sure. All right, we have some severe problems in this district with health care. In the rural counties, a lot of people do not have access to good health care. They have to travel miles and miles to get it. And a lot of people, transportation is almost non-existent here unless you have a car. So that's a big problem. I have been sitting with nurses from UVA, nursing students, getting their ideas. They say we need nurse practitioners in every county. And we need federal funding to do that. We do not want that money to have to come from the counties that can't afford it, nor from the state. That can be federal funding for nurse practitioners. We need nurse practitioners in the schools to deal with some of the problems that students have, including mental issues, and this would bring costs down extraordinarily. I said, how much would it bring costs down? They said an absurd amount, because people would have preventative care. Also, the woman who delivered 2 of my grandchildren, who is a midwife in Charlottesville, discovered when she moved to Charlottesville that if you're African American here, you are 10 times more likely to die in childbirth than if you were white. She also happens to run a big clinic in Uganda, and she realized that the child mortality rate in Nelson County is the same as Uganda. So she decided started. She's organized a whole group of women called Birth Sisters. They stay with women from the time they find out they're pregnant, through their pregnancy, through the birth, and afterwards. And all of those women that they have attended to have survived. This is the kind of program that needs to be expanded. And just like I went to a fantastic program in Lynchburg the other day of people looking after people with severe addiction problems, opioid addiction problems. And the people running it are all addicts in recovery. They know what they're talking about. They know you can't just stay in there 28 days. You have to be in there 8 months. They take care of housing and jobs. Let's give money to those kinds of programs. Expand them. Expand the good health ideas that are already working here.
All right, we are going to move to a very closely related policy area, the economy. Let's talk about economic growth in the district. You've each highlighted various priorities for building the 5th District's economy and creating more jobs in the district. Jobs through clean energy, agriculture, apprenticeships, vocational training, better infrastructure and transportation, increased broadband access, tax policy, increased wages. There's a lot of ideas on the table. So one of the things I'm going to want to get at is what your priorities are. But my first question is just kind of a yes or no. Do you all support a federal minimum wage of $15?
Yes.
I support an increase in the federal minimum wage.
Do you have an idea of where you would like that increase to hit?
Yeah, I think this is if I can use more than just a yes or no on this, I think this is a complicated issue that we need to address as such. If you put a $15 minimum wage on, let me step back and say, this is an interesting district. The difference between cost of living in Fauquier County and cost of living in Farmville and Rocky Mount, very different. And while a living wage may be $15 in one place, it's $12 in another. And I think that we need to be realistic about the economy and say, if we put a $15 minimum wage on businesses in some parts of Southside, you're going to destroy jobs. And we should be clear about that. And now if you still want to be for it, you can still be for it, but we need to accept the fact that in our conversations, I mean, we go to these communities, we sit with small business owners, we say to them, what happens if we do this? And they say, I'm going to have to lay people off. Now, we don't have to like that. You don't have to like that, but we need to know that that's what's going to happen. So I think we need to understand that Americans need a raise, but that it doesn't necessarily look the exact same in all different parts of our district.
Can I just finish my answer on that since it was just a yes? Well, I too am sitting with people all over the district, and I have not found anyone who said that they would have to lay people off for $15 an hour wages. I think that, first of all, the reason why our wages are so low is because wages in this country are stagnant, and they have been stagnant since the 70s. This is one of our biggest problems. People are being forced to work 3 and 4 jobs in order to survive. This is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. You have 2 parents working 3 jobs, and kids are, latchkey kids. This is a crazy situation. It has to change. And because we don't have unions, I'm a union member. I support collective bargaining, but we don't have a lot of unions, and therefore we have to take action and raise wages, or else we should have an American compact. The idea of this country is that if you work very, very hard, you can have a house, you can educate your children, you can have a decent life. Right now with these wages, people do not have that, and they're suffering, and it will hurt the country until the country becomes just like any South American oligarchy.
Listen, the minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009. It ought to be raised. It ought to probably be tagged to inflation, because this really hurts our workers and people in politics play games with it. But there's no question that a regional approach to minimum wage is the way to get workers a little more money in their pocket, but also continue job creation. And I agree with Ben. If you go to Southside and you talk to business owners, they are going to have to lay off people. The cost of living there is dramatically lower. But I want to talk about something real quick. I notice a lot of people who focus on the minimum wage, from my perspective, are not hitting the real problem. The real problem is that our institutions in our country right now are not aligned to give our workers the skills they need to compete in the changing economy. An economist calls this the middle skills gap. One of my professors once said to me, Roger Dean, the economy can't just be Uber drivers and college professors. We got to have something in the middle, son. And I think he's right. And I think it's up to us as the convener-in-chief for the economy for this district to make sure that when somebody leaves high school in Danville, they can enter the local economy down there, or they can go off and go to some other school and get those skills. So minimum wage is important. It is an important part of being a Democrat to advocate for it. I've talked to a lot of economists who say, listen, you're talking easily north of $12. If you count in inflation rates with healthcare and education, probably a little bit higher than that. So I can get behind that sentiment. But the fundamental problem is not that the minimum wage idea. The fundamental problem is that people are not getting the right skills to compete. Let me give you an example of how to change that. In Danville, what they've done is the Danville Community College has backed in some of the training from the community college into that last year of high school. And someone can actually learn advanced manufacturing in that last year, and then they're one more year in community college, and then they enter the economy down there making $65,000, $70,000 a year. And that's a lot of money. That's a great job. And that's the kind of thinking I want to try to bring to every single one of our counties in this district. This has a name. It's called regional cluster theory. The idea is basically, how do we figure out what's the thing in our communities that we can export to the world? And so we've divided the district into 5 different regions. We have tentpole industries up there. We'll have that up on our website next week. We're really excited about it. And so listen, the minimum wage is important, but we got to tackle this middle skills gap together by aligning our private sector institution, our research institutions, and our community colleges.
Yes, I would support at least $15 minimum wage, and it should be tied to inflation, so we're not having this gamesmanship every few years.
Let me follow up just really quickly. Andrew, what do you think is the fundamental economic issue in the district, and what policies should be implemented to address it?
I think, at least in the south side of this district, you have to understand, if you look at this map of the district, we run all the way down to the North Carolina border and a substantial distance across. We were highly, highly reliant in those places on just a couple of industries, manufacturing and the production of tobacco. And both of those have been lost almost completely over the last couple of decades. And so, so the problem in Charlottesville is not the same problem that we have down there. I mean, it would be the equivalent, I think, although I don't know the numbers on this, if we didn't have UVA in Charlottesville. It would devastate a community because the communities were so tied to one or two industries. And so what I see is we have to, with great challenge like that comes an opportunity for us to rebuild a much more robust and multifaceted economy that isn't nearly as vulnerable to one or two industries going away that would leave such a region so devastated. And I will tell you all, the place where I grew up and the town that I grew up in is about 3,000 people, and it was almost exclusively farm based, and there were a couple of small manufacturing jobs like Brown Shoe and Gates Rubber, and those have all gone. And the farm that I grew up on used to take about 10 people to farm, and my dad would do a welding shop in the winter to keep our hands working through the winter, and now it takes 3 people to farm 2,500 acres. And anybody that tells you that those jobs are coming back either doesn't understand the problem, or they're lying like Trump did to everybody's face. And so what I suggest is a re-education and getting away from this idea that a 4-year degree is the only thing that is of value. We have to reinvigorate our trades. We have to reinvest, and we have to have private and public investments that work together. Like in Danville City, you see things where the historic tax credits. And Tom Garrett is in a real pickle on that, because he's taken this absolute position where the free market should take care of everything. Well, I have bad news for him. All those millions of dollars that are flowing into those places would not happen without incentives by our federal government and state government. So those are the things I'd like to see.
Understanding the history of this district is a really important thing to understanding the future of this district. The history of Southside Virginia is a history of concentration, consolidation, and monopolization. And the future looks a little different. So let's look at Danville. We're using Danville a lot today as an example. At one point, Dan River Mills employed 17,000 people, and today it employs 0. It turns out it's fairly easy to make the bed sheets and pillowcases that they were making overseas, fold them up real small, and ship them across the Pacific Ocean. And so as I think about the way the future of the economy looks in the district, we have to take that into consideration. We need to think about a series of small, medium-sized businesses spread out across a wide variety of industries across the district. That provides an insulation for our communities, an insulation for our economy. As the economy ebbs and flows, we build that in so that one company can't destroy a community, that one community is not dependent on the success or failure of a single company. And so for me, we're not looking for a silver bullet for Southside Virginia. I'm not looking to bring Amazon headquarters there. Now, if Amazon wants to bring their headquarters there, that'd be great. But this, in reality, we need to be supporting small, medium-sized businesses. These are not necessarily sexy companies, right? This is an eyeglass manufacturer, a baby food company, a hearing aid manufacturer. These are the types of companies that we need to incent to locate in the 5th District of Virginia. And the last thing I'll say is that this is something that's near and dear to my heart. This kind of stuff gets me out of bed in the morning. And if any of us can't give you a good jobs solution for the 5th District of Virginia, you shouldn't vote for us. Because ultimately, that's one of the things that the person that replaces Tom Garrett is going to have to be held accountable for. So make sure that you're holding our feet to the fire on this issue.
Well, I would like to talk about the real economy of the 5th District. The top economic engines of the 5th are 1, agriculture, and 2, tied, tourism and timber. What we know from this is I spend a lot of time talking to the Cattlemen's Association, the poultry farmers, the timber people. And what is very clear to me is the success that we need to look at in the future is those ideas that those people already have. And that is expanding what is working now. For example, the south side is mostly timber, and the old tobacco farms are cattle. So these are important, very important export products. The timber, a huge amount of our timber goes to China right now, and China wants even more. But there are lots of timber-related businesses that could come into the 5th that would work perfectly here because you already have people who know a huge amount about timber. It's the same thing with agriculture. If you go to Virginia Tech and talk to them, as I did, about what do you do to replace tobacco besides cattle, the answer is malting barley. We have breweries in every county now. We have, so let's, what do the breweries need? They need hops and they need malting barley. Malting barley is a cash crop. It's just like tobacco, and it is working all over Southside in places like Mecklenburg. It works really well. Hops are growing very well up north in Madison County. The local breweries want local products, and there's even a fantastic guy in Nelson, Barry Wood, who has Woodridge Brewery, who started with malting barley. He then realized he could run his own malting operation, so he built that. He then built a brewery with wood from his own farm. He then decided he wanted to do his own food, so he built a bakery, and this is an engine of jobs. This is the future of the Fifth. And don't forget that so many of these counties like mine, tourism is absolutely key. And my Board of Supervisors, like many rural counties, they do not want people telling them what economic plan they should be following. That's their job. But if you look at the job of a congressperson is to help. Where can we help with federal money? Where can we, for example, in my county, it's very important, there's a gateway to the Shenandoah Park in Rappahannock County. It is crippling that this administration, with Garrett signing on to it, is raising the price of getting into the Shenandoah National Park to $70 for a car. $70 to go hiking for 2 hours. That means that the families who need our national parks, our national parks by law are for the people. They belong to the people. In several counties, including mine, we have families who were evicted from the park in the 30s with the promise that the park would be given to all. It is not being given to all now. That has to change, and when you think of it as an economic issue as opposed to a social issue, first of all, I want to give all the descendants of those park families free passes for life. But as an economic issue, our county needs to build on tourism. And Nelson County needs to build on tourism. So in Nelson County, you have a pipeline that's going to go right through all those cideries and breweries and wintergreen. How stupid is that?
I just wanted to say one more sentence about the economy. And you have 4 great nominees here, but if I'm your nominee, I cannot wait to get on stage with Tom Garrett and say, Congressman Garrett, you and your Republican friends in D.C. don't know a dang thing about the economy. Because what they are doing right now is operating as if Dwight Eisenhower was the President of the United States. They keep telling us that as long as they just keep cutting that top tax bracket, fairy dust is going to fall down and jobs are going to come out of the earth. That's not how it works, team. Okay? 25% of the businesses in this district are 20 people or less. The national average is about 14%, which means, getting to Leslie's point, we really got to focus on working with what our district brings us, which is things like ecotourism and green energy jobs and advanced manufacturing in the South. And so I don't understand why the Republicans in D.C. are so fixated on this idea that as long as we get large corporations more money, that everything's going to be fine for the rest of us. We know from the data that this has been a historic period of consolidation in the economy. These companies have tons of money on their balance sheet. They do not know what companies to invest in, what products to build, what people to hire. And now we've just made the problem worse. When we could have invested in small businesses, made it easier, had a comprehensive tax reform that really did make it easier to start a business in a place like the 5th District of Virginia. So this is a big policy difference between me and Congressman Garrett and the Republicans in D.C. And I want to fight to make the tax code fair for our small business owners here in Central Virginia and Southside.
And one thing that we can do at a federal level is invest in infrastructure. We've got 2 things in the 5th District of Virginia. We've got a massive need for reinvestment in our schools, for a massive reinvestment in our bridges, in our roads, in laying broadband. We have this need. We also have a higher than average unemployment rate. You know, if you read the newspaper today and you'd think everything's fine in our economy. It's not the case in South Southside Virginia. In the 5th District of Virginia, we've got counties with high single-digit unemployment, low double-digit unemployment. We've got folks who are desperately looking for work, and we can put them to work investing in our infrastructure. If you think about the cash-strapped schools in Southside Virginia, if you think about the bridges that are practically falling down, if you think about the fact that we've got kids who don't have internet in their houses to do their homework, this is a fairness issue. And so it's a fairness issue for our kids, it's a fairness issue in our economy, and it's a place that we can marry two issues that we have. We have a workforce that's able to do the work, and we have a need for this new infrastructure.
Well, we are going to have a few other small policy questions, but before that, I want to ask each of you about the general election and facing off against Tom Garrett. Whoever wins the Democratic nomination will, of course, face incumbent Republican Tom Garrett in the general election, and each of you has perceived weaknesses that Garrett is likely to exploit. So I want to take just a minute for each of you to talk about how you would respond to some of those perceived weaknesses, and I'd like to start with you, RD. You are a newcomer to Charlottesville from the tech world. Much of your support comes from out-of-state organizations. What do you say to primary voters who wonder about your knowledge of the district and its issues?
Sure. It's a very valid question. I think, I was born in North Carolina. I did grow up in Georgia, and my dad grew up on a farm in Lincoln County, North Carolina that looks a lot like most of Southside. And when I go down there and I say, yeah, I was born in North Carolina, everybody just sort of nods their head and said, okay, that makes sense. To a lot of those folks, especially in our African-American community, it's a heavily faith-based community. I was raised a Southern Baptist. I've read every word in the Bible. I've been on a mission trip. I'm very comfortable in an African-American church. I think that really helps connect with the folks down there. But listen, my campaign is a grassroots campaign. We have a donation from all 23 municipalities in this district. We've done hundreds of one-on-ones throughout the district. My campaign has made more than 120,000 phone calls. We have 9 full-time field staff out meeting with folks, recruiting them to our campaign every single day. And you know what? I am a Virginian by choice. That doesn't bother me. When you're a Marine, you go everywhere. And so I'm just used to that. But when Emma and I wanted to raise a family, I wanted to know the best place in the world that has a pretty low cost of living, pretty good weather, and good college sports. So, we chose it here. So I'm proud of that. I mean, I don't think that I know last night. My goodness. I know, we all lost some sleep. My friends were texting me and I said, the whole town is on suicide watch. But listen, this is the best place in the country to raise a family, and that's why we're here. I'm a trailing spouse. My wife's a OBGYN here. We're really proud of this. She had to duck out because I guess Alice Sue was crying, but we're proud to be here. I mean, I do think, obviously people ask that question a lot, Nicole, and I think it's a valid criticism. The Huffstettlers, to my knowledge, have been in the South. Johann Jacob Hofstadter landed in Philadelphia on July 1st, 1736, and it wasn't too long after that he went to North Carolina. And so I was not about to have a baby outside of the South because I'm not breaking the streak and reporting to my grandmother. So listen, we're Southern by birth, and I was proud to serve in the Marine Corps and serve overseas and around the country, but I'm proud to be here too. So I think that's how we think about the problem.
Ben, you have a different issue. You and your family are longtime area residents, but some might say that your resume for Congress is on the thin side. So how would you address that attack if Garrett said that you were too inexperienced to serve in Congress?
All right. Tom Garrett.
Just picture him right in front of you.
I'm just picturing him right here. It's you. So I take issue with the premise of the question. I'll give you what I've done in this district and why I think that it stands up to the question. So my first job out of undergraduate school, I went to the University of Virginia, was in education. I worked for the Office of Undergraduate Admission at the University of Virginia, recruiting students from around the Commonwealth to come to Charlottesville for their education. I can tell you I've been to every high school and community college in the 5th District of Virginia. My boss boss and I at the time, we wrote the first guaranteed admission agreement for community college students to be able to automatically transfer to four-year schools, which gives people from a wide variety of backgrounds the opportunity to attend four-year schools. People that wouldn't have had access to wonderful colleges like UVA, like William & Mary, like Virginia Tech, they did because of these guaranteed admission agreements. My MBA at the Darden School, and I've been working in the private sector ever since. And one of the reasons that I'm very comfortable going up against Tom Garrett on this issue is because I've created jobs here. I've invested in companies in the 5th District of Virginia. And when Tom Garrett comes at me with his resume, I'm going to say to him, Tom, what have you done? What jobs have you created? I can point to this company and that company and this spot, and I can say, I've done this here in our community. And also, the last thing I'll say on this topic is, this is a district where having a deep and abiding understanding of it really does matter. This is not a district where you just pick it up by driving around, right? This is an issue where I've been going to I've vacationed in Smith Mountain Lake. My siblings have gone to college in Farmville. My grandparents have lived and worked across Southside and Southwest Virginia. I have a deep, abiding understanding of the people in this district. And I think that ultimately what that comes down to and how that manifests itself is trust. I think that when I come back to my constituents and I say, here's why I voted for something, here's why I took the stand that I did, they'll look at me and say, you know what? We trust Ben because we know he's just doing what's best for folks back home.
Leslie, you are personally and professionally connected to big Hollywood and big media, two institutions that conservatives love to hate. How would you respond to Garrett's attacks on liberal elitism?
I'm a very proud member of the liberal elite. Yes, I have a daughter who's an actress and is a wonderful Democratic activist as well. Olivia Wilde, I don't know if any of you know her, but she does great work, and I support her 100%. I think in terms of the elite, the Republicans have taken the word elite and twisted it in a very interesting way. Right now, we have a cabinet of billionaires. Not one of them ever goes through airport security because they're getting on their private jets. For any of them to accuse me or anyone here of being elite is outrageous. Yes, I'm a very proud member of the media. There's nothing wrong with having spent many years working hard as a 60 Minutes producer or a frontline correspondent or a writer for Vanity Fair or writer for, I've written for the New Yorker. There's nothing wrong with that because that is very important work. I am a proud member of the Fourth Estate in retirement from that job. You cannot do two things at once. You can't be a politician and a journalist at the same time. But we need journalists. There's nothing wrong with it. And also in terms of the 5th District, Ben was saying he knows the 5th District well, but I have to tell you that in my county of Rappahannock, not even the volunteer fire department knows all the back roads of Rappahannock. So we're always learning, but it is a very special place, and in terms of traveling around this district, the more you go to every county, the more you learn, the more relationships you build, and the better you are as an advocate for people in the 5th.
All right, and Andrew, according to Open Secrets, you've raised only $125,000 in the course of this campaign, the least amount of the 4 candidates in the race. How do you intend to win against an incumbent who happily takes hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Koch brothers and the NRA?
First of all, I don't think that's an accurate number, but so look, when back in October, it was voted to make this a convention, and whether you believe it should be or a convention or a primary, we had 2 campaigns prepared, and the one that we had prepared for where the convention had a number that was much lower than if it were going to be a primary. And the reason being is because in a convention situation or caucus situation, what we do is we get out into every single part of this district and we build relationships. It's exactly what Tom Perriello did, and if you look at my numbers, I think they're very much in line with what Tom Perriello had raised in 2008. In fact, I sat down and literally drafted a campaign plan based on what had won in 2008. It's not based on simply raising money. It's based on building relationships. It's based on having people that are advocates for you in every single part of this district, be it Fauquier in the north, Rappahannock, or Henry County, or Brunswick all the way to the southeast. And that's the way we built this campaign. And the second part of this is there is no doubt it is going to take a ton of money, probably $2 to $3 million, to win this in the general election. And I promise you, we have a plan to raise that money going into the general. Thank you.
All right, in our remaining probably 10 minutes, since we started a little late. I know you guys have pasta sauces that you have to answer. But I want to ask you just a few kind of broad brush questions to see where you stand on some of the other issues that we haven't touched on yet. The first is, we had a rare moment of bipartisanship last week when the Senate passed a bill to ease regulations on the banking industry that had been put in place after the 2008 financial collapse. Democratic supporters of that bill include Virginia Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner. So if you were in Congress, would you vote in support of deregulating the banking industry along the lines of the bill that just passed the Senate? Andrew, why don't you start?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Without referencing either of our fine senators, who I hope Senator Kaine will be reelected, I don't understand the vote on this one. And middle Americans are constantly under attack and thrown under the bus, and this is a perfect example of that to me. The financial collapse that happened was not the least of which because nobody was watching the hen house. The fox was at the door, and we didn't have regulations in place that would prevent people from bundling, for example, very low quality loans. I remember back to the buildup of 2008 when they were encouraging anybody to either refinance or go buy property that they could not afford. They didn't even look to see if you really could afford to purchase that property, if you could monthly make those bills. They didn't care because they knew they were going to bundle them and they were going to resell those assets. And to do away with anything that gives protections against that kind of abuse will come at the cost of not only middle and lower income Americans, but at our economy as a whole. And so I absolutely would not support deregulation at this point.
RD?
Yeah, I have to apologize. I have not seen the specifics of this bill, but I will say that one of the things that triggered the renegotiation here, the idea that the Frank Dodd needed to be amended, was that we lost a lot of community banks. And a lot of those community banks were here in Virginia. A lot of those community banks would have been in the 5th District of Virginia. So we do need to re-examine that. There's something about, I believe, the capitalization level of those banks that they adjusted in that bill. So I don't want to say whether I would support that bill or not. I don't want to hem and haw, but I just haven't read it. But I will say I would support a bill that would improve that capitalization level so that we're not closing some of our local community banks. That's really important for growing the economy at the local level. Entrepreneurs need to be able to walk in there and say, hey, I need 100 more bags of feed so I can expand my store. Well, we've got to make sure there's a bank in that community that can meet that need. So I would support a compromise that would fix that problem.
I would not vote for this bill as it is in front of the Senate right now. To me, this is the problem with big corporate money in politics. After the financial crash and Dodd-Frank was instituted, big banks all of a sudden didn't have it as good as they used to, and they're upset about that. So what they do, they went about giving a bunch of money to politicians, and now they've got the bill that they finally wanted. And And this bill does a lot of really specific things that benefit very specific companies. Benefit banks like Citi. You wonder how you can trace the money from Citi's PAC, from Citibank's PAC, to politicians, to how they're voting on this bill. This is when we talk about the corruption of our politics, this is what we're talking about. There's a provision in this bill that gets down so specific. It is literally, if you're a bank between $1 and $3 billion in assets that is headquartered in Fort Worth, Texas, then you get this specific relief. Now, that bank gave a bunch of money to their congressman who got that provision inserted into the bill. So this, to me, embodies everything that is currently wrong with Washington and why we need wholesale change in Washington.
Well, I would certainly not vote for this bill. 9 months before the crash, my husband is also a journalist, and we set aside everything and did a year-long investigation of what was happening to people who we realized that people were losing their homes at a terrible rate. We went to the courthouse steps of Baltimore, and homes were being sold every 10 seconds. So we started going to all of those people to see what was happening with their mortgages, why they were losing their homes, and tracked those loans all the way up to Wall Street, all the way up indeed to Goldman Sachs in one of the main ones. What we saw was fraud at every level. Fraud at the level of the boiler rooms where all these guys were shoveling these loans at people knowing that they could never pay. And they also readjusted the figures in their computers to make it look like they could pay. It was out and out fraud, which is why tens of thousands of those companies who were hawking that stuff went broke. But they were spurred on by Wall Street banks. The Wall Street banks were offering those boilerplate companies 110% profits. They needed those terrible loans to create those wonderful CDOs, and it was like magic. They took all those bad loans and they securitized them, and then they sold them in a very fraudulent way to investors. They were even doing CDO squares, where you do a CDO of a CDO, and that was real magic, because something could be such a bad loan that it was right at the bottom, but you could take that tranche and shove it up to the top in the new CDO squared and sell them off to South Korean banks. That's what they were doing. Dodd-Frank stopped, to a certain extent, not all the way, this kind of fraud. And now it's like termites eating at a building. We are going to be in a position, once again, where we could have another financial crash. Already, the securitized loans, whether it's auto loans, student loans, everything is very shaky. So what we're going to happen, if the banks don't set aside enough capital, and the bill means that they're not going to do that, the price tag is going to be very high for all of us, because we're going to be paying for the next crash again. And believe me, last time, the bill was supposedly $700,000-800,000 for the bailout. It wasn't. If you include the Fed, it was upwards in the teens of trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars we spent, and we cannot afford it again. So I'm sorry that our senators made this choice, but I will say one thing about community banks is that the big banks use community banks as a shield. They put them up. The lobby says, oh, look, this is going to hurt the little guys. But it's really the big guys who are reaping the benefits.
I have about a million other questions, but I'm only going to ask you one. I'm going to do a quick poll, and then I'm going to give you a chance for like a 30-second follow-up. So let's just do the poll first. On education, one of the most pressing problems, and this is good for a college town, is the high cost of higher education in the United States that people end up paying off for decades after they've gotten their degree. So first of all, who supports free tuition for all community colleges? just 30 seconds or so, what do you think is the top policy that Congress can put into place to make college education more affordable? And we'll start with Leslie.
What is the top policy?
Right. What is the top policy priority for making education more affordable?
Well, we need to make education overall a top priority. Right now, it's not a top priority. I would start by fire Betsy DeVos. That would be good. You know, all those fraudulent loans, there are about 86,000 fraudulent loan complaints by students that are sitting on desks at DOE right now, and they've reduced the labor force to about 14 people to look after those things. So nothing will be done. Consumer protection has been gutted for students. And we are forcing a generation of students into debt slavery. This is truly shocking. To say, you know, where can we get the money for free community college? Believe me, there is a massive amount of money being wasted in Washington right now. The Republicans love spending money. They just added $1.5 trillion to the deficit. Well, the amount of student loans in this country is about $1.5 trillion. So if you really are desperate to spend that money, why don't you spend it on the students? Why don't you get rid of all those student loans? It's a matter of priority, and it's a matter of shifting from programs that are just blatant fraud and abuse and waste, and shifting them over into education.
Education is near and dear to my heart. I'm a child of two public school teachers. I'm a public school kid. I told you I worked in education. This is one of the things that drives me out of bed in the morning. And one of the reasons that the question was, do you support full, free community college? My answer to that question is yes and no. It's no because I think this needs to be need-based. I think community college and whether or not we make it free should be based on financial need. I see no need for a family who, has a combined income of $3 million in McLean to get free community college. They can afford it. This is an issue of fairness. I want to see the people who can't afford to go to community college be supported. And so we've got the infrastructure in place, the FAFSA. We need to dramatically simplify the FAFSA program, make it easier for people to fill out. Right now with the FAFSA, you guys have all filled it out. It's like 72 pages, 108 pages extra of the explanation. I mean, it's just absurd. With my last 10 seconds, I'll say the thing that we can do at the federal level is we can treat schools as infrastructure. One of the things that when you talk to school boards across the district, they say the federal government is great at sending a rabbit, but not a carrot. And that's their way of saying that they send down all sorts of things that you're supposed to do, but no money. And I don't necessarily want to tell every school district what they need to do in terms of education, how many teachers, etc. But I do think that we need to, from a federal perspective, view building schools as infrastructure.
The most important person in my life I'm now related to is my high school chemistry teacher, Miss Susan Smith. And about a week into her advanced chemistry class, she said, "Sit down, I got something to talk to you about." I had a conversation with that biology professor, and he says, "You're a B student. Why are you not making A's?" And that made a big difference in my life, because my parents didn't get the chance to go to college. And it changed my life. Susan Smith inspiring me to do a better job in chemistry. I'm a recovering chemist. At one point, I think I had the periodic table memorized. It's been blocked now. But it changed my life. I studied chemistry as an undergraduate. And I'm the product of public education. I have one blemish on my record. Went to the Harvard Business School on the GI Bill, but no one's perfect. But listen, I want a Susan Smith in every school in this country. And that's exactly what will fix this problem. A high-quality teacher who can inspire our students to do things that maybe their parents didn't get the chance to do, that's what we need to fight for. And we got to make sure they're being paid well and that they have the professional training to do their job. This testing pendulum has gone way too far. We need to rein that back in. And listen, this education can still be the great equalizer in our society, but it's not there yet. It's not in every zip code. It's not true for every family, and that's why we're doing this.
this is an issue that is still very personal to me because my wife and I are in the second half of our 40s. We're both attorneys, and we are still paying her student loans, and not a small amount every month. And I will tell you, for me, my parents didn't have anything to give me when I went off to college. They expected me to go to college. They told me I needed to go do it, but they didn't have a single dime to give to me. And so I worked my way through school on Pell Grants and scholarships, and then went to law school, and it took me until, I want to say 43 before I paid it off. And the primary way I paid it off was by restoring a house. I don't know what that says about my practice of law, but I used my hands to do something of value, and that was, I was able to pay off my student loans and move here to Charlottesville. I think the number one thing we could do policy-wise is, do you realize that bankruptcy, the one debt you cannot discharge in bankruptcy, and it will follow you to the grave and beyond, is your student loan debt. I think that the minute we take that and change that our schools will then become partners with the students in not only educating them to the jobs and the market, but they will be tied together from that moment on to make sure that they get that they get jobs and keep jobs that can pay back those student loans. That's the number one thing I'd like to see. Thank you.
Yeah. Now we're going to give each candidate 90 seconds to have a closing statement. And one of the things we'd like to hear from you in that closing statement is what's unique about your candidacy? What sets you apart from your friends on stage here? And we will start with Leslie and come down this way.
I think what's unique about my candidacy is that I have a resume a mile long. You can go on Wikipedia and you can see my past. You can see that I have spent most of my adult life speaking truth to power and giving voice to the voiceless, time and again. And this is the kind of skill that you really need now in the 5th District. I see it so clearly. I remember, I sometimes talk about a story I did in Baghdad when the National Guard was having to do their patrols in vehicles that had no armor on the bottom. They were losing their legs, they were losing their lives, whole communities were being decimated because the Guard units were so cohesive. They called them cardboard coffins. So when I was at 60 Minutes, I worked together with the Guard and we exposed this atrocious fact, and it really helped the Pentagon take action. In fact, the other day in Franklin County, a woman jumped up and said, I was an Army colonel, I was in Rumsfeld's office, and that piece changed everything. So being able to do that and then looking at around this district and what can be done, for example, there's an African American community in Buckingham County. There is going to be a pipeline compressor station right in the middle of this community. This is going to cause illness. It's a nightmare of, it sounds like 4 diesel locomotives, 24/7. There are 45 families that would be in the blast zone if this thing blew up, and they do blow up. This is the kind of thing that can be changed. It is exactly the same skill set. Also, going up against Tom Garrett. Tom Garrett has been in Washington for a year now. He's on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He talks a lot about the world. I am fully equipped to take him on when he talks about Iran or North Korea. That is going to be very important in debate. And I also think, I've heard people say, I don't know if a woman can win. But let's look at the statistics. 17 men have failed to take this seat. Democrats. 2 women have failed. Why are the 2 more important than the 17? This is a tough district for a Democrat. It's a real fight. But this year is a very special time. It's a very exciting time. People are coming out in droves around the district. We've had standing room only in many Southside counties. People care and they're energized and excited. And I think that I'm a very good candidate for those people, and I think I can get a lot done.
So I want you guys to understand a little bit about how I view success in this job. How do I think that a person who represents the 5th District of Virginia should be judged in terms of success? I'm not going to Washington. I'm not applying for the job to be your congressperson because I want to be famous or be on television. Success for me is not being on MSNBC. It's not being on CNN. Success for me is every week driving home on Thursday night or Friday or whenever it is and saying, did I do something this week? Did I work to make people in the 5th District of Virginia's lives just a little bit better? To give them an opportunity they didn't have, to make their schools better, make health care more affordable, to make it a little bit easier for them to get a high-paying job. And if every week I can answer that question and say, yes, I did that thing, I did those things, then I'll feel like I've been successful. The second point I'll say is that I can beat Tom Garrett. When I talk about being from here and knowing this district, it's because that equates to a trust that people in this district have. And it puts a little bit of Teflon on you. So that when Tom Garrett comes at you with the inevitable attacks trying to tie you to X, Y, and Z liberal thing, X, Y, and Z, San Francisco, whatever it is, you've got a little bit of Teflon on you, and people go, wait a second, that's not the Ben that I know. That's not the Ben whose grandfather worked on the Southern Railway. That's not the Ben who spent his career investing in companies in this district. So when I talk about being from here, that's why. I feel like I have a standard for what success is in this job, and I feel like I can beat Tom Garrett in November. I'm asking for your support in this campaign. Thank you.
I just want to end with a quick little story about why I still believe in our country and why I want every family to feel about America the way the Huffstettlers do. I mentioned to you earlier I went to Paris to be trained as a Marine. There's 70 training days there. About 60 days in, you do something called the confidence course. You're supposed to leave the obstacles with confidence. You don't necessarily go in with that. But you're close to being a Marine, so you're pretty pumped, you're excited. And there's a particular obstacle there known as the A-frame. You go up a rope, you run across some logs, you jump through an A, through another rope, and you shimmy down, and that's it. Well, one of our fellow recruits, we'll call him Recruit Smith, was afraid of heights. And so he was bear hugging that A on that A-frame, and he wasn't going anywhere. But the drill instructor was providing a little encouragement for him. Get off my obstacle, screaming to the top of his lungs, calling him every name in the book. And I was about to get up there. I got up the rope, ran over the logs, and I'm thinking, hey, yeah, I can do it. The Smith guy, he's scared to death. And the drill instructor said, well, Smith, there's Huffstetler. If Huffstetler can do it, literally anybody can do it. And he was right. He was right. He wasn't just right about Paris Island, though. He was right about everything else. Huffstetler wasn't supposed to graduate from college, but I got to, on the Hope Scholarship in Georgia. A bill signed by a great Democrat so that anybody with a B average in any state school can go there tuition free. Huffstetler wasn't supposed to go to Harvard, but I got to because of the GI Bill, a bill signed by a great Democratic president to invest in a new generation of service members as they came back from freeing a continent and making us that beacon of hope in the world. Huffstetler wasn't supposed to necessarily, work in technology. My dad never got on an airplane, to my knowledge. But I did. We got some things done and learned a lot about the changing economy. This district is a hard district for a Democrat. But if you'll caucus with me, I'll do everything I possibly can. And I'm hoping that the most important thing I accomplish in my whole professional life is making sure that Tom Garrett is a one-term congressman. So please caucus with me. Thank you.
Thank you all. The first thing I want to say is that I've gotten to know every one of these guys up here, and you all have an extremely hard choice. I realize that, and nothing I say about myself, I want you to think denigrates any of them in any way. In fact, I would be proud to call any one of them my congressperson, and will do anything I can. This is about beating Tom Garrett. Thank you. Thank you. This is about beating Tom Garrett and taking a hateful ideology out of the 5th District. And I believe that I give us the best chance to do that because of where I grew up and the lessons I learned. My mother is my absolute hero in this world. I grew up on a farm, and when I was about 14 or 15 years old, we had to sell every single thing we owned, every tractor, every plow, to try to pay off our debts for that year. And we weren't able to do it. And after my parents got divorced, my mother sat me down and said, my mother, who had never worked outside the home, said, it's not okay for you to see me not pay off these debts. She said, we owe them to the tractor supply store and the bean supply, the place where we keep our soybeans in the winter. And as long as I have breath, that's what I'm going to do. And she took 2 jobs, working at a convenience store in the evening and at a bank during the day. And I used to worry to death that I wouldn't see her come home. I was scared at night that she wasn't going to be safe. And folks, I had to get a job before school and after school, and I had to help put food on the table for my sisters. And I watched my little town where every single mom and pop shop was there for generations went away. We lost tax base, we lost revenue, our education system suffered, and that town is so much like so much of the 5th District. Charlottesville and Albemarle are fantastic, and I know we are going to turn out in extraordinary numbers. But even when we do, that is not enough to win the 5th District. We have to go to every single spot in this 5th District, and I promise you, when you live through what I lived through, and it wasn't just us, it was farms all across that region and all across this region in the 5th District. When you live through that, you don't come out of it unchanged, and you don't come out of it in a way that you won't fight. You will not fight with everything you have for the people that are hardworking and who love this country and who live especially throughout the rural districts. And I think that our progressive values are the values that will lift up those communities. And we as a Democratic Party can't be the party that points to Tom Garrett and Donald Trump and says, don't vote for them, they're awful, and then we don't show up. And I am asking you to support me because I can, and I will show up, and I will speak to people where they are, and I will do so from a position of love, and I will talk to them about helping others is not a weakness. And that's what I ask you to help me do. Thank you so much.
I would like all of the candidates up here, we've all pledged to support each other, no matter who wins in the general. But I would like every candidate to pledge that they will not behave like the Republicans. That we will not slander each other. We will not undercut each other, undermine each other. No innuendo. That we will not engage in that kind of politics. Can I get that pledge?
Amen. Amen. Yes.